Evelyn was 10 years old when she first saw her cousin Caleb standing outside their grandmother's yellow-painted house. She peered at him through the thin lace curtain of the living room window, her breath fogging the glass. The afternoon sunshine fell in bright, slanting rays across the porch, rendering his silhouette stark against the peeling paint of the door. He wore a plain t-shirt, cargo shorts, and sneakers with the laces half undone. Caleb tapped a foot on the wooden step, as though restless for someone to answer the door. Meanwhile, voices from inside drifted around him, an uncle hollering that he'd be there in a minute, the faint clatter of pans in the kitchen. Evelyn could feel her pulse picking up in a way she couldn't explain. Her family had told her, "He's only a month older than you, practically the same grade. You'll get along great." She inched away from the curtain, suddenly self-conscious. Usually, she was shy around new people, even if they were family. She half expected that this newly arrived cousin would be just another kid to share chores and bicker with over the last slice of pie at Thanksgiving. But something about the way he stood there, quietly watchful, a mixture of curiosity and caution in his stance, stirred her interest. Finally, Aunt Patricia swung open the door. Evelyn heard her exclaim, "Caleb, come in, you've grown so tall." Then came the scuffle of footsteps. Another cousin's shrill voice echoed, "Hi, Caleb." Evelyn held her breath as though she could remain invisible behind the curtain. But an inexplicable pull made her abandon her hiding spot and walk into the foyer. He was now indoors, blinking in the relative dimness of the hallway. Their eyes met for the first time. Caleb's gaze was dark, flickering with an intensity that belied his 10 years. Evelyn, in a sudden flush of awkwardness, managed a small smile. "Hey," he said, voice soft. She swallowed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hi." In those two syllables, their bond began, a strange, fragile thread that connected them. Neither realized how deeply it would later shape their lives. That summer, Caleb's parents were in the midst of a trial separation, so he stayed with relatives off and on. Grandmother's house became a halfway point, a place of warmth and routine amid the uncertainty swirling around his home life. For Evelyn, who lived only a few streets away, daily visits to Grandma were already the norm. Now those visits carried a new excitement. She would see Caleb. In the mornings, they ate cereal with mismatched bowls, hers covered in cartoon flowers, his plain white chipped at the rim. They would exchange small smiles as Grandma bustled around, offering them jam on toast or cups of orange juice. Caleb tended to wake up earlier, an unspoken tension in his face, as though he were waiting for something. Evelyn eventually learned that his father was a pilot, often absent, floating in and out of Caleb's life. At 10, she barely grasped the complexities of adult relationships, but she sensed that he carried a private sadness. One day, they found themselves sprawled on the living room rug after lunch, the overhead fan creaking above them. They were flipping through a dog-eared family photo album. Caleb ran a finger over a photograph of his father, dressed in a crisp pilot's uniform, standing next to a small plane. "That's my dad," he said quietly. "He's probably in Florida right now, or maybe across the country. He calls sometimes, but not enough." Evelyn hesitated, glancing sideways at him. "It must be cool, though, being able to fly planes." He nodded, not taking his eyes off the photo. "Yeah, I wish he'd stay home more, but I guess it's in his blood, you know?" His voice lowered. "Sometimes I think it might be in mine." A flicker of excitement lit Evelyn's chest. "You want to be a pilot?" He shrugged, eyes still on the page. "Maybe. It feels like flying would give me some control, like I could just go anywhere I want. No one could stop me." She processed that with a child's wonder. "Can I come with you?" she asked, half in jest. He turned, their eyes meeting. A small, earnest smile curved his lips. "Sure, if I ever actually learn, you can be my co-pilot." Something about that promise hung in the air. Evelyn giggled and flipped a page, but she tucked the moment away in her thoughts. The idea of them taking to the skies together felt strangely natural, like a game that was also a truth. Afternoons at their grandmother's house often ended with the children in the backyard. It was a modest space with a patch of grass, a dilapidated swing set, and a few fruit trees. The neighbors' yards pressed in on either side, but once the sun began to set, the fences seemed to fall away into golden light. Evelyn and Caleb spent hours there. They kicked a soccer ball around, chased each other, or lay beneath the apple tree, letting the world drift. Their conversations wove between childish banter and genuine confessions. One humid afternoon, sweat beading on their foreheads, they lay under the apple tree, panting from a round of tag with the younger cousins. Caleb stared up through the branches. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for something big to happen?" he asked. "Not like birthdays or school starting, but something that changes everything." Evelyn traced a finger through the grass. She'd never put such a feeling into words, but she recognized it. "Sometimes," she admitted, "like there's a door waiting to open, and you don't know what's on the other side." He turned his head to glance at her, the corners of his mouth turning up. "Yeah, exactly. It's weird we both feel that, huh?" She nodded, meeting his gaze. The sky overhead was wide and clear, a deep summer blue. Beyond the apple tree's leaves, a plane soared in the distance, a faint white speck crossing the sky. Neither spoke, but their eyes flicked to it in unison. A shared breath passed between them, a silent exchange that hinted at a future neither could fully imagine. Not all their experiences were tranquil. One day, Grandma offered them money to bike to a nearby store and pick up milk, bread, and some candies for themselves. Evelyn's bike was old, with slightly crooked handlebars. Caleb's was a borrowed one, too big for him. But they set off eagerly, the sun hot on their backs. Halfway to the store, the sidewalk sloped downward steeply. Caleb raced ahead, whooping as the wind whipped through his hair. Evelyn tried to keep up, legs pumping frantically. When her front wheel began to wobble, panic clenched her throat. "Caleb," she cried, pulling on the brakes, but the worn-down pads barely slowed her. He glanced over his shoulder just in time to see her swerve. She lost control and collided lightly with a hedge, toppling onto the grass. The impact wasn't severe, but she scraped her knees and jammed a wrist trying to break her fall. Caleb skidded to a stop, dumping his own bike and sprinting to her side. "Evie," he shouted, breath ragged. "You hurt?" Blinking back tears, she pushed herself to a sitting position. "I'm okay," she lied, though her knees stung and her wrist throbbed. He helped her up carefully, eyes dark with concern. "You sure?" She nodded, biting her lip. Her knees bore shallow cuts, beads of blood forming on the skin. Fear flickered in his face, fear that mirrored guilt. "I should have stayed closer. I shouldn't have gone so fast." She tried to smile. "It's not your fault. I just lost control." They wheeled the bikes the rest of the way, Evelyn limping slightly. At the store, he insisted on buying bandages with the money Grandma had given them, ignoring her protests that she was fine. He crouched on the sidewalk, gently pressing a bandage over the scrape. Their eyes met in the quiet hush of that moment, his fingers trembling slightly against her skin. That night, as she fell asleep, she recalled the way he'd looked at her. Part protective, part terrified. A flutter filled her stomach, one she couldn't quite name. She wondered if maybe she had been too quick to dismiss her injury, because something deeper felt bruised and tender. Yet she also relished the memory of his concern, how he'd hovered protectively, how his face had softened. Summer passed into autumn, then winter. That year, a fierce snowstorm blew through their town, forcing roads to close and canceling school. Caleb, who had been visiting Grandma for the weekend, ended up snowed in for days. Evelyn's family, living close by, hunkered down as well. The power sputtered out on the second evening, plunging the house into candlelit darkness. While adults worried about food and the furnace, the kids found magic in the chaos, especially Evelyn and Caleb. They bundled up to catch snowflakes on their tongues, trudging through hip-high drifts in the backyard. Eventually they came in, shaking off clumps of snow, noses red from the cold. Night fell, and with no electricity, the house glowed with flickering candles and the dull orange of the fireplace. The younger cousins were put to bed in sleeping bags arranged across the living room. Evelyn and Caleb, both 11 by now, stayed up a bit later, listening to ghost stories told by an older cousin. The chill in the air made them shiver under heavy blankets. When the ghost stories ended, only the adults and the two of them remained awake. The adults, engaged in hushed adult conversations, soon retreated to the kitchen. Evelyn and Caleb lingered, blankets around their shoulders, the fire snapping and popping. He sank onto the couch and she joined him, drawn by his presence more than by the glow of the fire. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Shadows danced on the walls, and the warmth of the fireplace embraced them. She noticed the tension in his posture, his shoulders hunched, eyes distant. "Caleb," she said softly, "you okay?" He stared at the flames. "It's my dad. He was supposed to be home this week, but with this storm, I don't even know if he made it back." A pang of sympathy filled her. "I'm sorry." He shrugged one shoulder, trying to mask deeper hurt. "He's used to flying in bad weather, but I just wish he was here." Without thinking, she reached over and rested a hand on top of his. He turned his hand palm up, fingers curling around hers. The contact was innocent, yet charged with a closeness that went beyond ordinary cousinly affection. She felt a jolt in her chest, as if the house had been struck by lightning. They stayed like that for a long moment, the hush broken only by the fire's crackle and the wind's moan. She tried to calm her breathing, aware that any adult passing by might question why they held hands so quietly. But no one entered the living room, and the darkness shrouded them in a private cocoon. Eventually, Caleb sighed, letting his hand slip away gently. "We should probably get some sleep." She nodded, throat tight. "Good night." They parted, he to the couch, she to the corner where she'd laid out blankets. The storm raged on outside, but her heart raced harder. She couldn't shake the sensation of his fingers laced through hers, the tenderness in his gaze. She was 11, too young to label the emotion, but old enough to sense the confusion and longing it birthed. By the time Evelyn and Caleb were both 14, life began pulling them in different directions. Caleb's parents had reconciled superficially, and he returned to his hometown a few miles away, attending a different high school. Evelyn immersed herself in new routines: choir, drama club, volunteering. Their once nearly daily contact dissolved into monthly or even bi-monthly family gatherings. Yet each time they saw each other, that odd electric bond resurfaced. They might exchange only a few words, perhaps a teasing jab about a new hairstyle or a nudge when passing in the hall, but the spark remained. Now at 14, each had begun to navigate the swirling tides of adolescence, uncertain about how to interpret the affection they felt. That year's Thanksgiving took place in a rented cabin by a serene lake. The entire extended family arrived in waves, bringing armfuls of food and enough teenage drama to fuel days of gossip. Evelyn rode up with her parents, looking out the window as tall pines lined the gravel road. She spotted a row of cars near the cabin and recognized Caleb's father's sedan. Her stomach gave a small jolt. Inside, warm chatter filled every room. The cabin's living area was dominated by a large stone fireplace where logs crackled merrily. Pie scents mingled with roasting turkey, creating a cozy but crowded atmosphere. Evelyn spotted Caleb across the room, lugging a cooler. He was taller now, hair slightly longer in the front, wearing a navy hoodie. She felt her heart skip. He caught her stare and smiled, just a small tilt of his lips. She smiled back. The next moment, her aunt hustled her into the kitchen to help chop vegetables, and the moment ended. Hours later, after the feast, the group split off. Some went outside for fresh air, others stayed inside to watch football or doze off. Evelyn, having cleared dishes alongside a few cousins, slipped onto the porch to breathe in the crisp late afternoon air. A watery sun was descending behind the pines, painting the lake in gold and purple hues. Caleb appeared silently, leaning on the railing beside her. "Survived the turkey madness?" he asked in a low voice. She smirked, shoving her hands in her jacket pockets. "Barely. We must have cooked for an army." He nodded, gaze drifting to the lake. "Peaceful out here, though." They stood in companionable silence, listening to the wind stir the pine needles. She studied his profile, more defined than when they were 10 or 11. There was something thoughtful, even melancholy in his expression. "High school treating you okay?" she ventured. He shrugged. "Baseball's great. I pitch for junior varsity. Classes are fine. My parents, still complicated." She nodded, unsure how to respond. "I'm in choir now," she offered. "I actually like performing, which surprised me." He turned, eyes lighting with genuine interest. "Really? That's awesome. Do you do solos and stuff?" She laughed, ducking her head. "Sometimes. It's nerve-wracking, but I love it. Kinda like you and baseball." A flicker of a smile played on his lips. "We might be more alike than we thought." She felt a tug in her chest at those words, recalling their childhood pledge to fly together one day. Here they were, each forging a path that would eventually converge with that dream. even if they didn't fully realize it yet. A gust of wind rattled the porch boards, sending goosebumps up her arms. She was about to suggest they go back inside when he angled his body toward her. There was something searching in his expression, a question unspoken. She swallowed. Her mind flashed to the memory of holding hands in front of the fireplace years ago, the bike crash, the quiet nights talking about the future. She opened her mouth to speak, but at that moment her mother poked her head out, calling them in for a group photo. The charged silence broke. They followed her mother indoors, tension trailing them like a ghost. Life sped up and family gatherings scattered across the year. Their interactions were often snatched in passing, a wave, a grin, a swift side hug. But at a 4th of July cookout, they found themselves alone in a cluttered garage, tasked with retrieving folding chairs for the guests. The midday sun baked the driveway, so the garage offered a welcome coolness, if slightly stuffy. Wood scraps, old bicycles, and boxes labeled Xmas ornaments filled the space. Evelyn rummaged for the chairs, cursing under her breath when she tripped over a rusted toolbox. "You okay?" Caleb asked, turning from a shelf of paint cans. "Fine," she grumbled, rubbing her shin. He moved to help, crouching to push aside the toolbox. His shoulder brushed hers, sending a flutter up her spine. He straightened, glancing around. "This place is a mess." "No kidding," she huffed, tucking a strand of sweaty hair behind her ear. "Who knew Aunt Meg's garage was basically a junkyard?" he snorted. Then, eyes drifting down, he noticed her knee. "You scratched yourself?" She glanced down. A faint red line marred her skin, probably from the toolbox. Caleb's brow furrowed in concern, reminding her of that day with the bikes. The memory made her heart pound. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. He nodded but lingered, stepping closer. The atmosphere shifted, the stuffy air seeming charged. Outside, distant laughter and chatter drifted in. "You've changed," he murmured, voice low. She blinked. "Huh?" He let out a small, nervous laugh. "You know, you always seemed so quiet when we were kids. Now you look more confident or something." Her cheeks warmed. "I'm in drama club. I learned to pretend I'm not shy." He studied her face, a softness in his gaze that unsettled her in a way both thrilling and frightening. "It suits you." Heat rose to her face, and she was grateful for the dimness. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sudden sound of footsteps outside cut her off. Another cousin swung open the garage door, asking impatiently if they'd found the chairs yet. They both jumped back as though burned. Evelyn cleared her throat, quickly grabbing a stack of folding chairs. Caleb followed suit, and together they emerged with neutral expressions. But the memory of that moment lingered. In her peripheral vision, she caught his downcast eyes, a quiet frustration etched in them. By 16, Evelyn was navigating her first real attempts at dating, if one could call them that, short-lived crushes that fizzled after a few awkward text exchanges. Caleb, meanwhile, was rumored to have a thing with a girl on the cheer squad, though Evelyn never got the full story. Family teased them separately, making half-jokes about "bring your sweethearts to Thanksgiving someday." They each forced polite laughter, hearts clenched with uneasy guilt they barely understood. That autumn, a family reunion at a rented lake house brought them face to face again. The property was surrounded by towering oaks, shedding leaves in shades of red and gold. A crisp breeze rippled the lake's surface. By midday, the family was barbecuing in the yard. Children screamed with excitement over yard games, while adults clinked glasses of cider, catching up on the year's events. Evelyn found a spot near the water, perched on a large rock. She was content to observe from a distance. Warm afternoon sunlight glinted on the rippling lake, and she breathed in the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. Caleb approached, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. The leaves crunched under his feet, announcing his presence. She turned, offering a half-smile. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Hey," she echoed, hugging her knees. "It's peaceful here." He nodded, gaze drifting out over the water. "Needed a break from the crowd. Some argument started in the kitchen about politics, and I escaped." She laughed lightly. "Same reason I'm here." They let a comfortable silence unfold, the distant chatter of relatives blending with the whisper of wind through the trees. After a moment, he spoke, voice quiet. "I remember when we were kids, we talked about planes all the time. You still thinking about that?" She drew in a breath. "A little. I'm interested in seeing the world, maybe being a flight attendant. It's not as adventurous as piloting, but I like the idea of traveling. He stared at the lake, eyes narrowed in thoughtful contemplation. You'd be good at it. You're good with people. Her chest tightened with gratitude. Thanks. He drew a shaky breath. I've been playing baseball for years now, but I still remember telling you I wanted to fly. Sometimes I wonder if baseball is just a distraction from that real dream. She studied him. You could do both. He snorted softly. Maybe. They lapsed into another hush. Overhead, an airplane rumbled, drawing their eyes skyward. A silver speck cut across the brilliant blue, contrails streaking behind it. She felt that familiar longing, the same sense of possibility she'd had at 10 years old. Caleb must have felt it too, because he said, "We'll get there somehow. I don't know how life will shape up, but I can't shake that feeling." She realized he was talking not only about flight, but also about the sense of restlessness, the intangible connection they shared. A swirl of emotions welled inside her. Hope, fear, guilt, longing. The taboo was unspoken, but it lay under every word. Before she could answer, a voice called from behind them. "Hey, dinner's ready." They turned to see an uncle beckoning. Caleb cleared his throat and nodded, both of them rising to head back. That fleeting glimpse of shared dreams once more slipped into the current of everyday family life. At 17, both were halfway through high school, busy with final exams, college prep, extracurriculars. Their families arranged a grand Christmas gathering at Grandma's house, full of bright decorations, the smell of pine and cinnamon, and the constant motion of children underfoot. Evelyn arrived in the early afternoon. Snow blanketed the lawn, shimmering beneath winter sun. She dragged her suitcase inside and caught sight of Caleb, helping carry a large evergreen wreath for Grandma to hang on the porch. He wore a worn denim jacket, cheeks flushed from the cold. The brief glance they exchanged made her chest flutter. Inside, the noise level was already high. Someone blasting holiday music in the living room, multiple conversations crossing in the hall. Evelyn shed her coat, greeting relatives with quick smiles, scanning for Caleb. She found him in the kitchen, cutting cubes of cheese for an appetizer tray. Two ants chattered nearby, only half paying attention. He noticed her and flashed a grin. "Just in time. Want to help?" She laughed, stepping to his side. "Sure. My knife skills might not be as great as yours, though." He chuckled softly, tossing a cube of cheese at her, which she dodged with mock indignation. This easy banter masked an underlying tension that tugged at them. She was aware of how his shoulder brushed hers in the cramped kitchen, the faint warmth of his presence. They prepared the tray amid the bustle, exchanging quick smiles. Once done, they carried it to the dining table. Relatives swooped in, praising them for helping. They retreated to the living room, where a massive Christmas tree sparkled with lights and ornaments that had been collected over decades. Later, after dinner, gift exchanges commenced. The children and teens gathered around the tree while parents passed out presents. Amid the chaos, Caleb nudged Evelyn with a small wrapped box. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. She opened it to find a silver pendant shaped like an airplane. It was delicate, about the size of her thumbnail, with tiny etched details on the wings. Her breath caught. "It's beautiful," she said. He shrugged, eyes flicking to the side. "Saw it at a craft fair. Made me think of you." A warmth spread through her, and for a moment, the noise and light seemed to dim. Thank you," she managed, voice quiet. She reached out and squeezed his hand in gratitude, quickly letting go before anyone could notice. Later that evening, when the family had largely settled, she sneaked to a corner of the house near the Christmas tree to admire the pendant in better light. Caleb appeared beside her. They stood there, half hidden by the tall branches of the tree, the colored lights casting patterns across their faces. She fiddled with the charm. "So, you still want to be a pilot, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, more than ever, actually. I applied to a couple of flight academies. I'm hoping one will offer a scholarship." She smiled, genuine pride shining in her eyes. "That's amazing." He leaned in slightly, the faint scent of pine and cinnamon swirling around them. "What about you? Any big plans?" She took a breath. "I'm applying to flight attendant training programs, some kind of hospitality courses. I know it's not as glamorous as being a pilot, but I want to see the world." He shook his head. "That's not less glamorous. It's awesome. we'd still be in the sky together, right? Her heart thumped. The idea of them forging parallel paths had always been a childhood fantasy. Now it felt tantalizingly real. Maybe we will be, she said softly, eyes drifting to his. His gaze lingered, the colored lights reflecting in his dark irises. She felt an almost unbearable tightness in her chest, the push and pull of wanting him near and knowing the boundaries that loomed between them. Before either could say more, a younger cousin bounded over, squealing about a board game. They broke apart, forced to pretend they were just two cousins having a holiday chat. Yet the whisper of something deeper trailed them like a ghost through the rest of the night. Senior year of high school arrived like a tidal wave of expectations. Evelyn juggled college applications with part-time work. Caleb, likewise, was balancing advanced classes, baseball tournaments, and scholarship forms for flight academies. Phone calls and texts between them grew sparser, though they kept each other updated in bursts. Evelyn, busy day at the cafe, made cappuccinos for a group of traveling businessmen, gave me serious wanderlust. You'll be traveling soon enough. Just got a letter, accepted into a flight academy in Florida. Partial scholarship. Their families heard the good news at roughly the same time. Evelyn had an offer to join a reputable flight attendant training program post-graduation, while Caleb was set to enter a pilot academy that fall. Pride rippled through the family. Everyone joked that the flying bug must run in the bloodline. One day, they both received invitations to a barbecue thrown by an uncle, intended as a joint celebration of their achievements. Evelyn arrived first, helping to set up balloons and streamers. Caleb arrived late, fresh from a baseball game, in uniform. He looked exhausted but triumphant, hair damp under his cap. The yard buzzed with conversation. A few older cousins teased Caleb about teaching them to fly someday, while others pestered Evelyn about free flights. She endured it with polite laughter, scanning the crowd for him. Eventually, they found each other near the grill, which no one was using yet. She could smell charcoal and sun-baked grass, and her heart beat faster as he approached. "Congrats, official flight attendant," he greeted with a tired but genuine smile. She returned the grin. "Congrats, future pilot." They hugged briefly, a gesture that felt simultaneously routine and laden with hidden emotion. Pulling back, she noticed the dirt smudges on his uniform pants, the faint bruising on his knuckles from gripping a baseball. "You okay?" she asked, eyes flicking to his hand. He shrugged. "I'm fine, just pitched all 9 innings, my arm's sore." They migrated to a quieter corner of the yard, near a tangle of rose bushes in bloom. Shouts and laughter ebbed away, giving them a pocket of privacy. "How soon do you leave?" she ventured. He exhaled. "Right after graduation. My program starts in late June. It's accelerated, so I need to jump in quick." She nodded, stomach twisting. "Mine starts in August. Flight attendant training, different city, different schedule. I guess we won't see each other much." He looked down, scuffing a foot against the grass. "Yeah, probably not." Silence weighed on them. The summer air felt thick, as though storm clouds hovered just out of sight. It occurred to Evelyn that in just a couple of months, they might be states apart, forging new lives. Her chest ached at the thought. He cleared his throat. "I guess this is what we always wanted, right? To get closer to flying?" She swallowed. "Yeah, we did." Their gazes locked, each reflecting the other's mixture of excitement and dread. For a moment, she wondered if he might say something about the deeper bond they'd skirted around for years. But a cousin suddenly called them over to the beverage table, and the moment broke. They joined the rest of the family, plastering on smiles that hid the swirl of emotions inside. Graduation arrived in a blur of caps, gowns, and proud parents. Caleb's ceremony took place the same weekend as Evelyn's, so they couldn't attend each other's. They sent supportive texts, promising to compare notes later. Then, almost overnight, they were gone from the towns they'd grown up in. He flew to Florida for flight school. She moved to a bustling city in the Midwest to start her training. The next few months passed in a haze of orientation sessions, late-night study marathons, and the excitement of forging new friendships. Evelyn learned how to handle passenger concerns, serve beverages at 35,000 feet, and memorize airplane safety protocols. Caleb crammed advanced aerodynamics, navigational charts, and simulator hours. Their contact was sporadic, A text here, a late-night call there, often cut short by exhaustion. Yet whenever they did connect, that familiar warmth resurfaced, like a hidden ember that refused to die out. So I flew solo for the first time today. My instructor said I'm a natural, but I'm terrified. Terrified of what? That it'll consume me, that I'll become like Dad, always gone. But the feeling of being in the cockpit, Evie, it's unreal. I'm proud of you, just remember you're more than the job. Late at night in her dorm-like apartment, she'd sometimes stare at a photo of them from childhood, both covered in mud in Grandma's backyard, smiling at the camera. She couldn't pinpoint when their bond had grown from innocent cousinhood into something deeper, overshadowed by taboo. She only knew it hurt to be so far away, unsure if they'd ever address it or let it fade. On a bitterly cold winter evening, Evelyn found herself in Denver International Airport, dreading the next leg of a connecting flight to Seattle. She wore her crisp flight attendant uniform, black heels pinching her feet, a rolling suitcase trailing behind her. The concourse hummed with travelers bundled in coats, announcements echoing overhead. Weary, she sank into a waiting area chair, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Her gaze flicked around, half-focused on passengers rushing past. Then she froze. A tall figure in a navy blue jacket with Flight Academy patches stood near gate C-23, scanning the monitors. Even from a distance, she recognized the way he held himself. Straight posture, a tinge of restless energy. Her heart thumped. She stood, carefully weaving through the crowd. When she drew near, he turned. Their eyes locked, and his face broke into a stunned smile. "Evelyn?" he said. She felt a rush of warmth, an almost dizzy joy. "Caleb, hey!" They hugged, a quick, slightly awkward embrace. It had been over a year since they'd last seen each other in person. They found a quieter area by the windows, where late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floor. Planes roared outside as they taxied for takeoff. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice still tinged with surprise. He lifted his duffel bag. "Connecting flight back to the academy. I was doing some advanced training in another state. You?" She gestured to her uniform. "Just got off a flight from Chicago, heading to Seattle next, short layover." They stared at each other, absorbing changes. He looked older, broader shoulders, a confident tilt to his chin. She felt older too, more self-assured, yet uncertain how to navigate this sudden chance reunion. "Let's get coffee," he suggested, though both already held cups. "Or, sit and talk?" She led him to a set of seats away from the main flow of people. They sat close, knees inches apart, the hum of the terminal enveloping them. "Tell me everything," he said, leaning forward. She laughed lightly, launching into her experiences. The demanding flight schedules, the thrill of traveling new cities, the challenges of cranky passengers at 5 a.m. He listened intently, nodding. When she paused, he shared how flight school was going, his first cross-country solo, the intensity of instrument rating tests, the nights he lay awake questioning everything. "You'll do great," she assured him, remembering how single-minded he'd been about flying since childhood. "Just don't burn out. I can hear the stress in your voice," he grimaced. "Yeah, I know, but I love it." Then he shifted in his seat. "What about you, life outside of work?" She hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "I haven't really dated seriously. Feels like there's no time. And you?" He fiddled with the strap of his duffel. "Same. A couple of short-lived things, but I can't focus on relationships. It's all about flying right now." Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing silently. Each recognized a deeper reason behind their romantic hesitations, one neither dared speak aloud. Announcements for boarding boomed overhead. Her phone buzzed with a reminder she needed to head to her gate. They stood, an unspoken reluctance in their movements. "I should go," she said, tucking a hair behind her ear. "This was so good seeing you." He nodded, swallowing. "Keep in touch more, okay? Don't let another year go by." She mustered a smile. "Promise." They exchanged phone numbers anew. Though they'd had each other's, they'd changed phones. With a final glance, she turned and walked away, fighting the ache in her chest. The memory of his warm smile lingered, accompanied by the knowledge that the same undercurrent still existed between them, an unresolved chord that refused to fade. After Denver, they stayed in closer contact. Quick calls after flights, sporadic texts, "How's the new route?" Or just landed in Dallas, rough turbulence. They shared silly memes about airline life and vented about bizarre passenger requests. Beneath the casual banter lay a well of unspoken emotions. A typical late-night conversation. Caleb, text 11 p.m. Just finished an advanced simulator session. I'm wiped. You up? You up? Yeah, insomnia after my last flight. Passengers from a bachelor party, rowdy times. Caleb. Sounds entertaining. I had to practice emergency landings in the sim. The co-pilot's a weird guy from Jersey. Haha, at least you're almost done with training, right? 6 more months. Then I'll be looking to get hired by an airline. Maybe we'll finally work the same flight? That would be interesting, yeah. Would it be weird? Maybe, but maybe it would be nice. She reread that message multiple times, heart-pounding. The unspoken tension thrummed. Would it be nice because they were family, or because it was the only way to be close without suspicion? A cousin's wedding brought them physically together again. This cousin was older, and the event took place in their old hometown's grand church. Evelyn, who had just turned 22, managed to schedule time off. Caleb requested leave from flight school, now nearly complete. The entire extended family gathered for a lavish celebration. Rehearsal dinner night was chaotic. People bustled in and out of a quaint bed and breakfast the bride's parents had rented. Fairy lights twinkled in the courtyard and soft music floated on the evening air. Evelyn arrived with her suitcase, hugging relatives. She glimpsed Caleb near the entrance, in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans, looking older than she remembered, confident in a way that made her chest tighten. They greeted one another with a quick hug, careful not to draw lingering eyes. But the closeness, however brief, stirred every dormant feeling inside her. That night, after the formal rehearsal dinner ended, a smaller group lingered in the B&B's cozy living room. Most were sipping wine or hot cocoa, talking about wedding details. Caleb found Evelyn in the corner, fiddling with a magazine on an end table to look busy. He eased into the chair beside her, quiet enough that no one seemed to notice. "You look tired," he murmured, taking in her face. She half smiled. "Long flight. And you? You seem anxious." He exhaled, glancing around. "Guess I'm on edge. I'm about to officially graduate from the academy, and it's hitting me. Everything's about to change." She nodded, pulling her legs in closer to the chair. "I get it. Changes can be scary." In the dim lamplight, the hush around them felt intimate. She could hear the gentle rise and fall of conversation from the other side of the room, but it felt distant. She wanted to reach out, grab his hand, tell him she understood every flicker of doubt he carried. Instead, she swallowed the impulse, leaning back in the chair to keep a safe distance. Eventually, a relative called them over to finalize the next day's schedule. They parted, each carrying a private swirl of longing. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. Evelyn wore a light floral dress, her hair styled in a simple updo. Caleb sported a tailored blazer and tie, looking every bit the poised pilot in training. The ceremony in the grand church featured stained glass windows filtering brilliant morning sunshine. The bride glided down the aisle in a swirl of lace, the groom beaming. Evelyn and Caleb sat with other cousins. She was keenly aware of his presence only 2 seats away, the heat of him, the faint, crisp scent of his cologne. Whenever the officiant spoke of commitment and love, her mind uncomfortably drifted to the taboo feelings she harbored. She stole glances at him, wondering if he felt as uneasy as she did. At the reception, a lively event with a DJ and buffet, she tried to mingle. She danced with an older uncle who taught her swing moves. She laughed with younger cousins over wedding games. Yet every time she glanced across the room, she found Caleb watching her. She couldn't decide if the look in his eyes was longing or despair. Maybe both. Later, while the dance floor pulsed with a pop song, Evelyn stepped out for fresh air. The reception hall had a side door that opened to a moonlit courtyard scattered with rose bushes. Soft night air caressed her arms, carrying the laughter and music from within. She nearly jumped when Caleb appeared at her side. He'd been leaning against the stone wall, half hidden in shadow. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said gently. Her heart pounded. "It's fine, just needed a moment." He nodded, offering a sad smile. "This wedding makes me think about a lot of things." She fiddled with the skirt of her dress. Me too. He hesitated, then quietly ventured. It's weird, right? Everyone's celebrating love and marriage, and we… He trailed off, pained. She swallowed, feeling tears prick. I know. He took a small step closer. Sometimes I wonder, if we weren't cousins, what would this be? The words spilled out, trembling with the weight of years. Her breath caught. She dared not look at him. Maybe it wouldn't be so complicated. Silence. The faint thump of music vibrated through the walls. She sensed him wanting to close the distance, to say something that would break them free of this half-life they were living. But the risk of crossing lines in plain view of family stifled him. At last she forced a shaky laugh. We should go back inside before we're missed. He exhaled, nodding. Right. They returned to the reception, wearing masks of composure, hearts raw. Neither slept well that night. Each tossed in separate beds, replaying the words, if we weren't cousins, what would this be? Not long after that wedding, Caleb graduated from his flight academy at 23. He interviewed with regional airlines, and to his quiet delight, was hired as a first officer, co-pilot on smaller commuter jets. Meanwhile, Evelyn, having proven herself as a reliable flight attendant, earned a position with a major carrier's regional branch. They traded news. Evelyn, my new base is in Chicago. Busy airport, but it's a step up from my old roots. Caleb, no way, I'm based there too for my commuter flights. This is insane. At first, the idea of sharing a home base seemed exciting. They might run into each other at the airport, grab coffee between flights, but the unspoken tension also rose. What if they ended up on the same flight crew? Could they maintain professionalism while harboring so many unresolved emotions? Sure enough, a scheduling quirk placed them on a short flight from Chicago to Detroit. Evelyn saw Caleb's name on the roster. He'd been assigned as the pilot, albeit in a co-pilot capacity under a more senior captain. Her heart jolted when she realized she'd be the lead flight attendant on that route. That morning, she arrived at the crew lounge early, nerves swirling. She'd always been punctual, but now she was determined not to appear flustered. Dressed neatly in her airline's blue and gold uniform, she reviewed the passenger manifest and safety checks. She sensed movement behind her and turned. There he was, in crisp pilot attire, black slacks, matching jacket, gold stripes on the shoulders. He carried his cap under one arm. Morning, he greeted, voice subdued. She attempted a professional smile. Good morning, First Officer. He almost laughed at the formality. Weird, huh? She pressed her lips together, feeling her pulse race. Just treat me like any other crew member. He nodded, though his eyes hinted at the history they shared. They walked together to the gate, careful to maintain a veneer of colleague-like politeness. The flight itself was short, only about an hour in the air. She handled passenger service swiftly. He conferred with the captain about flight plans and weather. A handful of times, they made brief eye contact across the cockpit door or during announcements. Each glance carried a silent charge. Yet outwardly, they were consummate professionals. When the flight ended, neither lingered. Evelyn rushed to connect with a second flight out of Detroit. Caleb had a different route. They exchanged a quiet goodbye at the jet bridge, leaving behind a swirl of conflicting emotions. Over the following year, they each climbed the ranks. Caleb transitioned into a full pilot's seat on certain flights when his airline needed him to fill in. Evelyn became a lead flight attendant more regularly, a position requiring her to manage cabin crews. They occasionally crossed paths in the airport. A short, "Hey, you're heading out?" or "How was your route?" accompanied by a quick wave. The camaraderie between them could almost be mistaken for typical coworker warmth. But beneath the surface, that old bond simmered. During layovers in distant cities, they texted. Caleb, just landed in Atlanta. How's Denver? Evelyn, exhausting day. One passenger fainted. All good now. You're safe. That's what matters. Thanks. Miss talking to you. That last message often hung between them, unaddressed. They'd never resolved the taboo longing that lingered in the background. Each text, each call, was a reminder that they were family, but also something else entirely. At 25, both had firmly established themselves in their respective positions. Caleb was a captain on shorter routes with the regional airline, unusual for someone so young, but his record was impeccable. and he'd advanced quickly due to staff shortages and good performance. Evelyn was a seasoned lead flight attendant, accustomed to calming nervous flyers, handling emergencies, and maintaining top-notch service standards. Then came a schedule that made her heart lurch. Flight 293 from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco. The pilot in command, Captain Caleb Ashford, she'd be the lead flight attendant. The morning of the flight, a crisp April day, dawned with the hum of an overcast sky. Evelyn arrived at the airport 2 hours early. She pulled her suitcase through the terminal, her mind racing. Could she handle being in a closed environment for 4+ hours with him at the controls? Professionalism demanded it. But her heart hammered with an undercurrent of nerves, especially after all these years of unresolved emotion. When she reached the gate, she found the other attendants checking equipment, verifying the galley inventory. She greeted them with a tight smile, then slipped into the jet bridge to do her pre-flight cabin inspection. The cabin smelled faintly of disinfectant. She walked the aisle, checking overhead bins, seat belts, and emergency cards. Halfway through, she sensed a presence behind her. She turned to see Caleb standing at the cockpit door, speaking with the co-pilot. His uniform fit him perfectly. Black slacks, pilot shirt with gold stripes, and a jacket. He looked calm, professional, every bit a confident captain. He gave her a polite nod. "Morning, Miss Lead." She forced a small smile. "Captain." Their eyes met. She imagined the years, the memories, the phone calls, the near confessions. She forced it all away, focusing on her role. "All set here," she said, voice steady. He nodded, speaking neutrally. "Understood. We'll start boarding in 15, swag. Expect moderate turbulence over Nevada. We'll keep you updated." "Thanks for the heads up." She turned away, heart pounding so loudly she feared he might hear it. Passengers trickled in, a mix of business people, families, and a few couples. Evelyn guided them to seats, helped stow luggage, and responded to typical questions. One man complained about overhead bin space. She addressed it calmly. Another passenger was anxious about the turbulence warning. She offered a reassuring smile. All the while, she felt the weight of anticipation, knowing Caleb was just beyond the cockpit door. Takeoff proved uneventful. The cabin rattled gently as they ascended into thick clouds. She performed the usual announcements, demonstrating safety procedures. His voice soon came over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Ashford. We're climbing to our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, expecting to land in San Francisco on schedule around 2:10 p.m. Local time is 9:05 a.m. We may hit some bumps, but we'll keep you informed." Hearing his measured tone, she almost forgot their shared history. He was simply the captain, in control. She exhaled, focusing on distributing beverages and snacks. The co-pilot made occasional weather updates, calm and matter-of-fact. Yet beneath that professional veneer, both felt the strain. Caleb in the cockpit, mind racing through checklists, but aware of Evelyn's presence behind the closed door. Evelyn in the cabin, smiling at passengers while her thoughts wandered to him. The first 2 hours were smooth. She took a brief break in the galley, sipping water, trying to steady her nerves. A younger flight attendant teased her about how the captain's pretty cute. Evelyn forced a laugh, cheeks coloring. If only you knew, she thought. About an hour outside San Francisco, the seatbelt sign blinked on. The co-pilot announced choppy air. Evelyn moved swiftly down the aisle, instructing passengers to return to seats and secure tray tables. She felt the plane shudder as they hit the first wave of turbulence. A child cried out in fear. She knelt, offering a comforting word before strapping the child in. The turbulence worsened. Over the PA, Caleb's voice, "Flight attendants, take your seats." Short, clipped. Evelyn swallowed, hurrying to the nearest jump seat. She buckled in, heart pounding as the plane jolted unpredictably. The overhead bins rattled, a few passengers gasped. In the cockpit, Caleb's jaw clenched. The wind shear was stronger than forecasts indicated. He worked the controls, scanning the instruments, trying to find a stable altitude. The co-pilot, Ross, read out crosswind speeds. They were manageable, but fierce pockets of updraft threatened to jar the aircraft at any moment. Sweat beaded on Caleb's brow. He recalled simulator sessions of dealing with sudden turbulence. He could handle this. Yet a corner of his mind lingered on the fact that Evelyn was out there in the cabin. He needed to keep everyone safe, but the knowledge that she was aboard intensified the pressure. For 5 long minutes, the plane bucked and dipped, battered by sudden gusts. Evelyn gripped the seat's edges, recalling a similar, though milder, experience. The child across the aisle sobbed into her parent's shoulder. She prayed it would pass soon, trusting in Caleb's skill. Then, almost as quickly as it started, the turbulence eased. Over the speakers, the co-pilot's voice came on, tight but reassuring. "We've cleared the rough patch. We should have a smoother approach going forward." Gradually, Evelyn released her white-knuckled grip. She glanced around to see if any passenger was injured or in distress. A few looked shaken, but there was no sign of serious harm. Breathing a prayer of relief, she unbuckled and helped calm those who needed it. She stole a glance at the cockpit door, feeling an urgent need to see him, to confirm he was okay. But the flight must go on. She had a job to do. Minutes later, with the plane stabilized, she approached the cockpit to offer water to the pilots, a standard courtesy. The co-pilot nodded a thanks, but stepped out briefly to speak with a flight attendant in the galley. That left Caleb alone in the cockpit. She entered, carefully closing the door behind her. The hum of avionics filled the confined space. He glanced at her, eyes still tense. "You okay?" she asked softly, holding out a bottle of water. He exhaled, accepting it. "Thanks, yeah. Rough out there, but we got through." She nodded, swallowing. The overhead instruments glowed, reflecting on his face. He was so close, the same person she'd grown up alongside, yet now simultaneously a professional pilot in command. For a moment, the plane and the rest of the world seemed to recede. She wanted to say something profound, admit the fear she'd felt, the relief that he was in control, the years of unspoken tension. But a lump blocked her throat. He handed the water back, voice low. I'm glad you were here," he managed. "As weird as that sounds." She blinked. "Me too." They stared at each other, the cockpit lights illuminating old longing in their eyes. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers must have settled. She realized she should return to the cabin. But the moment felt too precious. He swallowed hard. "Evelyn?" He hesitated, scanning her face. So many words fought to surface. Apologies, confessions, pleas. But the door opened. The co-pilot stepped back in, clearing his throat. She jerked away, heat rushing to her cheeks. Without another word, she slipped out of the cockpit. Their near confession remained a silent echo amid the dials and switches. The rest of the flight passed in relative calm. The approach to San Francisco was smooth, the golden coastline visible through passenger windows. Evelyn performed final checks, instructing everyone to remain seated until the plane stopped at the gate. Caleb guided the aircraft onto the runway, landing with a slight bump, then taxied to the assigned gate. Once parked, the engine noise subsided, seatbelt signs clicked off, and passengers bustled to retrieve luggage. Evelyn stood by the exit, offering the usual farewells. The flight crew, including the co-pilot and other attendants, filtered out first. Eventually, the cabin emptied. Caleb exited the cockpit last. He paused near her, the vacant cabin stretching around them. Ground crew voices echoed from outside. Her heart raced. They had maybe half a minute of privacy. He removed his cap, looking exhausted and conflicted. He began, then stopped, jaw tight. "That was intense. I'm sorry if..." She shook her head quickly. "You don't have to apologize. You did great. You kept everyone safe." He raked a hand through his hair. "Evelyn, this can't keep going like this. We can't keep pretending it's normal." Her throat constricted. "I know." He glanced toward the open plane door, tension coiling in his posture. "We're cousins. We have to remember that. But these feelings, they won't go away, will they?" She felt tears burn. "No." A swirl of footsteps sounded on the jet bridge. Voices. Time was up. They stared at each other, hearts pounding. Finally, he inhaled, forcing composure. "I guess we'll figure it out," he said, voice ragged. "But not here." She nodded, stepping back. "Right." Cleaning staff entered, oblivious to the emotional storm. Caleb gave her one last searing look, then stepped into the jet bridge. She watched him go, every nerve in her body aflame. The plane had landed. The flight was over. Yet their story remained airborne, suspended in a haze of unresolved tension. By the time she finished post-flight duties, Evelyn found the terminal bustling with new passengers. She spotted Caleb once more at a distance, speaking to ground operations. Their eyes met briefly. A wealth of unspoken emotion traveled between them. but they were locked in place by professional obligations and the weight of their taboo bond. Later, she sank into a plastic seat near the gate, phone in hand. No messages from him. She typed a quick text, "Thank you for bringing us down safely." She stared at the screen, uncertain if she should say more. Her finger hovered. Then she pressed send, feeling a swirl of regret and longing. An hour later, while waiting for a return flight, she glanced at her phone. No reply. Perhaps he was busy filing reports or lost in thought. She pressed her lips together, deciding it was best to let him have space. The decision tore at her, but the alternative, pursuing a romance that couldn't exist under conventional eyes, felt impossible. So ended the flight that might have changed everything. The plane had touched ground in San Francisco, but their relationship remained up in the air, drifting amid uncharted skies. Would they distance themselves to preserve family order and professional boundaries? Or would they dare to confront the feelings that had defined them since childhood, risking scandal and heartbreak? The answers lingered beyond the gate, in an uncertain horizon of what might come next. For now, they had landed, only in the literal sense. The rest of their story lay ahead, unwritten, suspended between duty and desire, family and forbidden love, waiting for them to make the ultimate choice once the doors of the aircraft closed on the next journey.